and for Brandons and youngsters. That's all the time, basically.
Okay, Chaim, everyone. Okay, interesting. So, the Battle of Britain was one of the most important battles in World War II, and arguably one of the more important battles in history. During the Battle of Britain, from July 1940 all the way to the end of 1940, some people extended into 1941, because the German Air Force, the Luftwaffe, launched large-scale night bombings over Britain. Right? And what?
Britain is a city?
No, over England. So they tried to attack the larger cities in England under the cover of darkness. The main point was not that much to kill people; it was more to get the people to submit. It was more psychological warfare. They wanted the citizens of England to tire of the war and try to come with some sort of peace agreement with them. And in response, the British government issued citywide blackouts so that it wouldn't be able to see. And, of course, they also launched their own counteroffensive. They had planes trying to shoot down the German pilots. And they were very successful. Very successful. They were, yes, and they were very successful, especially during night battles. Why were they so successful? The reason why they were so successful is because of their new technology, onboard radar systems that they were able to install on the airplanes. And this, at the time, was unknown outside of England to the Germans. And the Germans were a little surprised at this tremendous success that the Royal Air Force was having against them. And of course, they wanted to figure out the secret, right? And the Royal Air Force wanted to make sure, do everything possible that they shouldn't figure out the secret.
How they can see it, right?
Right? How do they see us at night? What's going on? It's dark. So they realized that they of course they could try to hide it, but there are so many pilots, so many people involved, it's going to be very hard to keep this secret. So they had to come up with an alternate story, with a propaganda story, right? So at that time, the solution they came up with is
The British or
the British. The solution that the British came up with is carrots, right? So carrots was considered a very cheap, low-class vegetable before the war in Britain, but it grew very well throughout England. And during the war, especially with the embargoes and lots of shipments being blocked from coming to England, a lot of imports were stopped. They weren't able to import sugar and many other things. So they had to turn to things that actually grew on English soil. One of them was carrots and potatoes. And they came up with a very good idea. They began telling people that eating carrots helps you see better at night.
True? No,
right?
It's not true.
Well, there is a grain of truth in it. A person who is lacking, who is deficient in vitamin A, has a hard time seeing at night. I mean, bichlal, but especially at night. And therefore, somebody who is deficient in vitamin A is advised to eat carrots, which has beta carotene, which helps you develop vitamin A. But if you have enough vitamin A in your body, then eating carrots is not going to make the slightest difference. It's not going to improve your vision in any way. Well, this is the British public bought it up. They had a card. They had signs. They had advertisements all over. They put up all over the place. Let me see if I can find it. They had one of their star pilots, John Cat's Eyes Cunningham, as he was called. He managed to rack up like 20 nighttime victories. They shot down 20 planes at night. And he went around telling everybody how he ate so much carrots and how it really helped his vision, improve his vision. Right? They, let me see. Let me try to find the slogans that they put up.
Oh, so that's what they sell?
That one with the whiskey on, right?
Let's see.
Then the British started eating.
I can't find any of the. Oh, here, yes. They had the slogan, "Carrots keep you healthy and help you see in the blackout." They put up signs everywhere letting people know, right? They even had a cartoon character called Dr. Carrot. Right? This was very popular, right? And whether the Germans bought the story or not is not so clear. However, whether they bought it or not, they certainly had to investigate it, and it took up a lot. It was a big distraction from their end. They have to look into this. They have to do experiments to figure out what the effects of carrots are. And it was only in mid-1941, when a British airplane had to make an emergency landing in France, that the Germans were actually able to get their hands on the plane, and they found the radar inside. And within a very short time, they were able to duplicate it and put it on all of their planes. Wow. But at that time, the Battle of Britain was over, and it didn't really help. I mean, it helped them later in the war, but the advantage that they had in the beginning was very, very important, especially from a psychological perspective, that they were able to hold off the Luftwaffe.
It's a Jewish guy. He lives in Boca, I believe.
What?
The guy who made the radar.
The guy who made the radar. Okay, I don't know anything about that. So, let's see. So, of course, everybody, if you hear there's a food that can help you see better, improve your vision, everybody wants it, right? Carrots became very, very popular during the war, after the war, till today. There are many people who like eating carrots because they're convinced that it'll improve their eyesight. So you would think that in this week's Torah portion, where the Torah is listing the foods that we should eat, we should try to look for... What?
He was a pilot in the military. He used to eat a lot of carrots.
Okay.
Exactly.
So you would imagine that in this week's Torah portion, where we're learning the foods that we should eat, we should look for foods that can perhaps improve our vision. But actually, the Torah takes the exact opposite approach. The Torah lists a list of animals that are allowed to be eaten and not allowed to be eaten, and also a list of forbidden birds. And the Gemara asks that the same list of forbidden birds that we have in this week's Torah portion, we had a few months earlier in Parshas Shmini. We already listed those same birds. Now, of course, the entire Chumash Devarim is repeating most of the mitzvahs, but there has to be new laws, new chidushim that we learn from the repetition of the verses, of the laws. So what do we learn from the forbidden birds that are found in this week's Torah portion? So there are many different opinions in the Gemara. One of the explanations that are given is that there is a new bird that's found in Parshas Re'eh, which is not found in Parshas Shmini, a new forbidden bird. What is this bird called? This bird is called Ra'ah. Ra'ah. Ra'ah means vision. A bird of vision. Why doesn't the Torah tell us about this bird in Parashas Shmini? So the truth is the Torah already does tell us about this bird in Parashas Shmini, but it calls it by a different name. At that time it's called Da'ah.
What is Da'ah?
So Da'ah is the real name of the bird. That's the real name. That's the scientific, the Hebrew name that Hashem used to create this bird. However, this bird is known for its amazing vision. The Talmud says that this bird can fly in Bavel, in Babylonia, in Iraq, and it can spot a carcass in Eretz Yisrael, a few hundred miles away.
What's a carcass?
That's a dead animal. That's what it eats, right? It's a scavenger bird. So it can spot a carcass a few hundred miles away. And that's why people began referring to it, instead of Da'ah, which is its original real name, they began referring to it as Ra, the bird of vision. And therefore the Torah comes along and tells us, this bird that we mentioned earlier has a different name now in this area, and therefore we're going to repeat the entire section, the entire listing of non-kosher birds to teach you that this bird of vision is not allowed to be eaten. So of course we know on a deeper level, all of the forbidden birds represent something. They represent bad midas, bad character traits which we have to remove from within ourselves. So why is it that the Torah comes along and repeats this entire section in order to tell us, don't eat this bird which has amazing vision, right? Don't eat the carrots. Shouldn't we all try to eat the carrots, right? We all want to be able to see, to improve our vision, right? Won't need glasses. We'll be able to see at night. So why does the Torah tell us that this bird, which tells us that it can see so far, is forbidden? So, When I was a young boy, on Shabbos, I used to go to a special youth minyan, kids program at 770, and one of the it was run by Rabbi Engel and also by Yossi Goldstein, also known as Uncle Yossi, right? As a child, I grew up with Uncle Yossi's stories. They put out some books now with all of his stories. They have most of them recorded. So one of my favorite stories as a kid was a story, it's a mashal, it's not a true story. It's called The Return of Little Tzip Tzip. Has anybody ever heard the story, The Return of Little Tzip Tzip? No? Okay. So, Little Tzip Tzip is a young baby bird, and she's tiny little wings. She can't fly yet, but she's waiting for the day when she could leave her nest, spread her wings, and fly away. And as her wings begin to grow, she takes a few practice jumps, some practice flights around the nest, until finally the day arrives. She's old enough to set out on her own. And she turns to her mother and she says, you know, I feel like I can fly away. Like I can take my first trip. Where should I go? And her mother says, you can go anywhere you want. You can head out towards the east. Big, beautiful ocean. You can look out over the sands, see the waves breaking onto the shore. You can head towards the west. In the west, you can find the beautiful rivers and mountains. You can head towards the north, the big forest. Fly between the trees. Or you could fly towards the south with the beautiful orchards and vineyards. Where do you want to go? Tzip Tzip thinks, I'm going to head out towards the east. Okay? She flies out towards the east. After a few minutes, she suddenly stops. Looks around. Turns around the same direction that she came from and heads right towards her nest. Her mother is surprised to see little Tzip Tzip coming home so quickly. Is everything okay? She says, no, the east is terrible. Things are terrible in the east. There's this terrible stench, this terrible smell. Wherever I fly over there, I can't go anywhere near the ocean, near the beach. It's terrible. Her mother says, okay, that's a little surprising. Why don't you try heading to the north? Right? The big, beautiful forest. You can fly between the trees. Wonderful. Great idea. Little Tzip Tzip heads out towards the north. And a few minutes later, she comes back home. Terrible stench in the north. Right? Smells terrible. Mother's a little surprised. Why don't you try the west? Right? The mountains, the rivers. Okay, she heads out toward the west, and a few minutes later, she comes running back home. It's terrible, complaining of this terrible smell. Flying back home, right? Complaining about this terrible smell. And finally, she decides to head out towards the south. Beautiful fruit trees, the vineyards, the orchards, right? And again, after a few minutes, she comes running back, complaining about this terrible smell. Her mother takes a look at her and says, come here, come a little closer. Her mother looks at her and begins laughing. Ha, she says, look what I found! Right under your beak. This little piece of dirt, right? There's no terrible smell in the east. There's no terrible smell in the west. No smell in the north. No smell in the south. There's a smell on your beak, under your nose, whatever. I don't know, birds don't have noses. Right under your beak. Right? And many times when we look at another person, look at something and we find problems, we find faults, we have to turn around and say maybe the problem is really with us. Right? The Frierdiker Rebbe, when he was a young boy, so he once asked his father, why did Hashem create people with two eyes? Two eyes. Why did he create two eyes? Wouldn't one eye be enough? Right? So, I don't know. You know, some parents would have answered to explain 3D vision to him, but the Rebbe Rashab had a different answer. Right? I guess if Hashem would have wanted, he could have engineered a single eye that has three-dimensional vision, can detect distance. So why did Hashem create two eyes? So the Rebbe Rashab said, Okay,
One's
so
full
you can go there. I think there's water over there. Okay, is there water? Water bottles? Okay, yes, you can go to the back. So the Rebbe Rashab said to him that you know that in Hebrew there's two different letters, shin and sin. One of them has a dot on the right side, one of them has a dot on the left side. Right? And the same thing is true with the eyes. There's a right eye and there's a left eye. There are certain things which one has to look at with his right eye. There are certain things the person has to look at with the left eye. When you're looking at a siddur, when you're looking at your fellow Jew, for that you use the right eye. But when you're looking at a candy, at a toy, then you can use your left eye to look at that. Right? Yes?
One eye's for looking how Hashem is, how Hashem is, and one for looking how...
That's a different answer. That's not the answer the Rebbe Rashab told the Frierdiker Rebbe. Where is that answer from? It's from somewhere in the Torah. The question is where. This answer is from the Rebbe Rashab. Right? So, Rab Zusha of Anapoli was once visiting his Rebbe, the Maggid of Mizrich, and he was a young man at the time, and someone came in to see the Rebbe, to see the Maggid of Mizrich, and Rab Zusha took one look at this person. He saw immediately that this person was a terrible sinner, and he became very angry. How dare such a lowly person come in to see his Rebbe? And he began rebuking the person. He started listing all of the terrible sins that the person did. And he said, after all these terrible sins that you committed, you dare come to the Rebbe? The person became very embarrassed, and he left. And the Rebbe looks at Rabbi Zusha. Zusha immediately realizes that he made a mistake. And he said, Rebbe, I have to change the way I look at people. Can you give me a bracha, Rebbe, that I should know how to look at people the right way? And the Maggid of Mizrich gave him a bracha that he should never see bad when looking at another Jew. He should never see faults when looking at another Jew. And that's the way he tried to live the rest of his life. Never see faults when looking at another person. And the truth is, whenever we look at something, we look at another person, we look at a city, we look at a place, we look at a thing, we can always find merits and we can find faults, right? There's nothing that's completely perfect and has no faults, and there's nothing that's so terrible that it has no merits. And we have to choose what we want to look at. I heard a story. I wasn't able to track down this story. I actually looked for it before the class. I wasn't able to verify it. It might not be a true story, and if it is, I don't really know the details. But I remember hearing a story about a certain bacher, a very wise, brilliant bacher in the yeshiva, and he was very studious. He loved to learn. Everything he learned, he understood so well. He was the star of his class, the star of his yeshiva, and he was very successful in his studies. And all the teachers, were waiting for his questions, his chidushim that he came up with, his new ideas that he was able to originate. And all of his friends, all of his colleagues also looked up to him with respect. And after a while, this began to go to his head a little bit. And he became a little arrogant. And this expressed itself in the way he spoke to his teachers, in the way he looked down at his colleagues. And eventually, it was reported, this was, told over to the Rosh Yeshiva. And the Rosh Yeshiva realized he has to do something about it. You have a very good bacher, but arrogance is a problem. So he called him in, called his bacher in, and he wants to rebuke him. But he knows the way, when you rebuke somebody, you got to start off with something positive. You got to look at him in a good way. So he says, listen, I don't know what the bacher's name was. Let's call him Chaim. He says, Chaim, you're such a brilliant bacher. You do so well in your studies. Most brilliant bacher in our yeshiva. Perhaps one of the most brilliant, one of the best students I've ever known, he says. But unfortunately, I see that it's starting to get to your head. And it affects the way you speak to other people. And, it has to improve. And he goes on, he explains what needs to be improved. They finish the conversation, and Chaim heads out. And some of Chaim's friends who heard the Rosh Yeshiva call him in, they run over to Chaim and they say, "No, Chaim, what did he tell you?" Chaim says, "You know what he told me? He told me that I'm the best bacher in yeshiva. He told me that I'm one of the best bachrim he ever met, he's ever known." Right? That's what he took out of the conversation, right? When it comes to ourselves, we know how to find the merits, right? But when it comes to another person, what do we look for? Do we look for the merits or we look for the faults? And we have to know how to balance it and what's important to look at. Right? I said over this vart about like 8 years ago, I think, for bringing in Kfar Chabad, and Chassid or Michal Veshetsky came over to me afterwards, and he told me a relevant word connected to this. He said, we know on Erev Pesach we go out, we burn the chametz, and together with the chametz we burn our bedikas chametz set. What's inside the bedikas chametz set? There's a spoon that was used to pick up the chametz. Of course, it touched chametz, needs to be burned. There's the feather that was used to sweep up the chametz, it has to be burnt as well. And then there's also a candle. We burn the candle. Why do we burn the candle? Candle didn't touch chametz. Didn't come to any contact with chametz. Why do we burn the candle? So the answer that's given is that the candle which looked for chametz in a Jew's home, which went into a Jew's home looking around for chametz, needs to be burnt as well. Right? When we look at another Jew, we look for good things, we look for merits. Of course, there are times when we see faults, and we have to realize that it's a mirror of ourselves, and we have something to improve. Right? We all know the famous story of Rabbi Yitzchak of Berdichev. He's sitting in shul davening one morning, and someone comes running in. Rebbe, you got to see what Yankel's doing outside. Okay, Rebbe goes outside. Yankel, the wagon driver, and Yankel's in the middle of davening. The davening was a little long, so he went outside shul and he started greasing the wheels of his wagon. So Rabbi Yitzchak goes out and he watches Yankel grease the wheels of his wagon, wearing his talis and tefillin, in the middle of davening. And the Rebbe Rabbi Yitzchak looks up to heaven, and he says, wow, master of the world, look what a wonderful nation you have. A simple Jew like Yankel. He's in the middle of greasing the wheels of his wagon. And what does he do? He wears his talis, his tefillin. He prays to you, even while he's greasing the wheels of his wagon. Right? Now, for us, when they tell over the story, it usually stops there. But that's not where the story ends. Or afterwards, I'm sure Rabbi Yitzchak called Yankel in. He had a conversation with him about davening. But the first thing he saw when he looked at Yankel is he found something good in Yankel. Right? And this is how we have to live our lives. When we look at another person, the first thing we have to see is the good in another person. The Gemara in Tainus, Chaf Aleph from the Beis, tells us an amazing story. It says that Rava, one of the greatest Rosh Yeshiva at the time in Bavel, he would be, every Erev Yom Kippur, once a year on Erev Yom Kippur, he would receive a greetings from heaven. What does that mean? I don't know. I've never been sent a greeting from heaven. If anyone knows, you could let me know what that means. He was greeted from heaven once a year. Right? Abaya was also greeted from heaven, not once a year, every week. Once a week he received a greeting from heaven. I was very happy about this. But one time it was told to Abaya, to Rava, that there's another person, there's a guy named Abba Umna, who receives a greeting from heaven every single day. Now Abaya was a little surprised by this. He had never heard of Abba Umna. The name Abba Umna literally means a master doctor, right? The word Abba means like father. In those days it was used to mean, Mr. or Master. And Umna is a doctor, a bloodletter, which was a big part of being a doctor in those days. So there's this master doctor that receives a greeting from heaven on a daily basis. When Abaya and Rava receive it once a week, once a year, Abaya said, I have to meet this guy, I have to find out more about this person. So he begins inquiring, asking around, he figures out where this Abba Umna lives, and he finds people who come from that city, and he tells them, I need to talk to you about this Abba Umna. What type of person is he? What's so special about him? So they tell him, well, he's very, very careful in the laws of tznius and laws of modesty. In his office, he has separate offices for men and women. And when women come to see him, he has special garments that they wear to make sure that, except for the area that needs to examine, the entire body remains covered. He's very, very careful in the laws of tznius. Wow, that's amazing, says Abaya. It's wonderful, but I know a lot of people who are very careful in the laws of tznius. This doesn't explain the daily heavenly greeting. Is there anything else that's so special about him? So they say, yes, he's known for his tremendous chesed, tremendous kindness, charity towards other people. As a matter of fact, when you go visit him, when you come to his office for a visit, there is no price, there's no charge. Instead, he has near the door a little box. Everybody can put in whatever they want. You know, the rich people put in a nice amount. The people who are a little poorer can put in a smaller amount, and people who can't afford to pay don't need to pay anything. As a matter of fact, the box is even hidden on the side, so no one even sees what you're putting in. Right? He's so sensitive to the needs of the poor people. So Abaya says that's very nice. And I've met many people in my life who are known for their chesed, for their kindness, but none of them receive a daily heavenly greeting. There's got to be something else over here. So they say there is something else that's very special about this Abba Umna. Abba Umna has never said a bad word about another person. Not only does he never say a bad word, whenever he meets somebody, he could be the worst person, he always finds something good to say about them. He looks at another person, he sees the good in the other person.
What do you say about?
And Abaya says, this is interesting. This I have to see. You know, I have to investigate this. So he calls over two of his students, and he says, I want you to travel to Abba Umna city, and I want you to test him. And come back and give me a report. So these two students travel to Abba Umna city, they show up at his front door, and Abba Umna is so excited to have these two Torah scholars come visit him. He invites them into the house. He prepares the nicest room for them. He prepares a nice meal. After they finish eating, he brings them into their room. There's a beautiful bed set out with the most beautiful linens. I don't know what the thread count on those sheets were, with the most comfortable blankets and pillows. And he makes sure they have everything they need in order to have a good night's sleep. And then he goes to sleep, right? And these two students, they also go to sleep. These nice, beautiful, comfortable beds. And about 4 o'clock in the morning, they get up. They open up their bag, their suitcase, and they pull out a big sack. They turn around, they take the pillows off the beds, they throw it into their sack. They take the blankets, they throw it into the sack. They take these expensive sheets, they throw it into the sack. They take all their stuff, they clean out the room, and they head outside. Right? They go outside.
Taking their Airbnb with them.
Right? Some people walk out with the towels from the hotel. These guys walked out with everything. They cleaned out the room. Right? They walk outside, right outside a few blocks down. There's a big center of the city. There's a big marketplace. They set up a little table over there. And they wait. A couple hours go by. It starts to get light outside. And Abba Umna wakes up. He goes into the room. I guess he realized the guests are gone and everything in the room is gone. And he heads out. And he starts walking, and he passes by the marketplace. And as soon as the two students see him, they start calling out, sheets for sale, pillows, high quality pillows and blankets. Right? Abba Umna walks by, he passes right by the table, he doesn't even look at it. I guess he glances, and he continues walking. And they think maybe he didn't notice, maybe he didn't discover the missing sheets. Okay, so they call him over, and they say, Abba Umna, can you come here for a minute? Umna comes over and he says, we're selling these sheets, but we're not really sure exactly what to charge for them. We're thinking of charging, 100 gold coins for these linen sets. Abba Umna's like, no, don't take a penny less than 150. How do you know? Because I myself bought these sheets a couple months ago, and I know the price. Okay, have a nice day. Fine, okay. And he walks off. So they immediately call him back, and they say, what's going on? You're made out of stone? You watch us steal your sheets and then pretend to sell them? And you just walk right by us? What were you thinking? And he says, well, I know you're Torah scholars. I know you're Talmidei Chachamim. And I understood what happened. Maybe you could tell us what happened, right? So he says, well, I understood that in the middle of the night, you must have become aware of a Jew was in trouble. Maybe a Jew was taken captive, and you heard shouting in the middle of the night, someone yelling for help, and you realized somebody needed help right away, and you needed money to help them. And you were so considerate, you didn't want to wake me up, right? So you took me, and you knew that I would be happy to give something, give a donation. So you took the pillows and blankets, and now you're selling it to try to help a fellow Jew. I was so excited when I saw this, and I even advised you on the price. I made sure you're going to get a good price for it. So they came back to Abaya, and they told him the story, and Abaya said, listen, if that's the case, then this guy deserves his daily heavenly greeting.
So why do we
Right?
got two?
And this is really what's going on with this bird, right? The Gemara says this bird, this raw bird, this bird of vision, it's flying over in Bavel, in Babylonia, and it looks out towards Eretz Yisrael. And what does it see when it looks out towards Eretz Yisrael? Does it see beautiful mountains, beautiful valleys, beautiful rivers, the beautiful seas? Does it see a land flowing with milk and honey? No. It spots the smelly carcass over there, right? It can spot a carcass in Eretz Yisrael from Bavel. Comes the Torah and it says, I want you to know this bird has amazing vision, but this is not a bird I want you to have any relationship with. Right? When we look at Eretz Yisrael, which represents the Jewish nation, when we look at another Jew, we're not looking for the smelly carcass. Right? If the first thing we see is a smelly carcass, then maybe we should clean our own noses. Right? When we look at another Jew, we see the good in the other Jew. We see how the wagon driver, who's greasing the wheels of his wagon, is busy praying to Hashem. Chaim l'chaim, we shall internalize this and only see good in our fellow Jew. L'chaim l'chaim.